So,
Indeed.
quantum. Speaking of,
Yeah, there's a lot of quantum brain rot going on. So I think maybe we outline what quantum actually is and what we currently actually have. Let's start with that. It's like, what is it actually? What is quantum computing? Let's start with that.
well, I think a lot of, you know, I actually think of this a little bit differently. So I think maybe reversing it and asking why do people care? And I think people care because the largest company in the world is a computer company, and that has never been the case previously. So computer companies and semiconductors, they're not as terrestrial as like, okay, I know what Meta is, I know what Apple is, I know what Google is. You don't exactly use, some of these like very few people know what ASML or applied materials is or things like that because they're fairly, mundane kind of like, equipment providers that, okay,
Adrian, Adrian, you're putting out the Spaces music.
Why?
I
It
have
doesn't make
no
any
idea,
sense.
bro.
Is it gone now?
Yes,
I thank God.
you know the
I'm not even doing anything. I'm just literally existing.
you know that sound.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Unfortunately, I do. Yeah.
so yeah, I guess my point here is that we normally wouldn't give a crap about quantum other than but for the fact that compute is now interesting again. Whereas previously, I think there was this idea that well, who gives a shit about some random semiconductor company? At the end of the day, the biggest companies in the world were never hardware companies, and now we have that. So what do we do about it? And I think people want the next thing. So I think that sort of bears keeping in mind, just because I think there's like quite a bit of questions as to why bother, and I feel like quantum would be if Nvidia weren't 5 trillion, I don't think anybody would give a shit about quantum. And I think as I thought about this myself, and how to position myself in terms of like what do I do next? I think there was like a this idea that maybe what do I do about it? Maybe I'd be better off, sort of thinking about that instead of thinking about well why is quantum overvalued? Maybe I should be thinking about why is compute so interesting to people? And I think that's kind of a better. We're going to talk about quantum a lot as you wish, but I think that's almost a better, more productive way to think of things because I think that why why is there this desire for quantum? And I think that's generally the main reason.
Well, I think there's a few things that are sold to people. It's the bullshit articles that come out that's like this quantum computer is 50 trillion billion times faster than like a general computer than a supercomputer.
Right,
You
right,
hear all
right.
these things from fucking IBM and Google. And secondly, a lot of these things claim that, oh, we're going to be able to cure cancer because they can fold proteins more efficiently,
That's
and
not.
you're going to be able to break these types of encryption. So it's being sold to governments, it's being sold to medical industry, it's being sold to the general public as if it's a good thing. And also, it's the breakthrough, right? We're reaching a stagnation where we're kind of struggling to go below a certain uh, size for our transistors. So we need to go quantum because they're infinitely faster. Meanwhile, all the statistics about, oh, this computer is like 500 quadrillion times faster are complete bullshit because they're not even actually doing anything. They're just using sampling.
Yeah, I mean, I still think it bears keeping in mind that people want to go faster, and the question is to what end and why. I think companies like OpenAI and X and others, they do want to go faster. There is a reason to go faster, um, but what is it? What is it for? Is another question, right? Like, are we trying to do mammals faster? Well, quantum can't help you there, and that is what we're trying to do faster. And the very notion of speed is we're trying to think about speed in a lot of different ways. Algorithmic speed is more important than clock speed, typically, especially if you're saturated in some algorithm like matmals. You really want to be able to do matmals really quickly. You're going to want an algorithm that can do that quickly. And quantum has no such algorithm. There's no way to do almost anything faster on a quantum computer with algorithmic speed, right? So you need some algorithmic speed up, and very few people understand the cores of algorithms. I mean, I'm not exactly Mr. Algorithm myself, but I know enough to know that there are processes that are slower, there are processes that are faster. There's O notation and other ways to delineate which processes are faster or slower, and quantum has one major method for huge speedups to go from exponential to polynomial, which is a huge difference for those of you who don't know algorithms. That is the difference between something not being possible and something being possible. And quantum has one such algorithm where you can do that, and that's Shor's algorithm for factoring and for period finding and quantum Fourier transform, which
Yeah,
are
that's for
very,
algorithms. Breaking encryption,
yeah,
right?
yeah, very
Yeah.
limited scope there. Almost
Yeah.
nobody, almost none of the, if you surveyed Amazon EC2 or something like that, Azure, almost none of the compute needed today is related to this, right?
Yeah.
It's a very cursory kind of curiosity. People like me are curious about it, but not
Yeah.
too many people really give a crap about that. We care about map moles, and there's no way to do, especially non-sparse, dense map moles quickly, at least without a different method. And we'll talk about that in a second because I have something that could give us some hope here that's less, frightening maybe than what we're used to. So in any event, I think that there tends to be this misunderstanding of what is speed anyway, and speed is whether it's clock speed, which is one thing, or algorithmic speed, which is an entirely different matter altogether. I think that clock speed is something we can all understand. How fast does this thing whir, right? And every one of us has had a computer that's X gigahertz. Well, the quantum computers, very few people know this, but they're extremely slow. So the transmon superconductor computers are around a megahertz, and you and I have all had megahertz computers a long time ago as kids. They're not very useful or interesting. The ion Q and laser trapped ion computers are much slower. They're actually in the kilohertz range. So clock speed, you're dead in the water. There's just no way to get the clock speed any better. The um, at least at the moment. Maybe down the road they'll be better, but at the moment they're very slow. So only way you can win is algorithmic speed. Now, how do you make an algorithm faster? Well, this is really hard. This is what the entire field of quantum information science is. And I talked to the White House about this, and they agreed that you're better off developing more quantum algorithms than you are developing quantum computers, because you can't do anything with a computer until you have an algorithm that gives you that provable speed up. If you make a machine that can exploit the laws of physics to make some algorithm run faster, and when I say run faster, I don't mean clock speed, I mean number of steps. Um, and you could take the number of steps from, say, 10 to the 38th, which is what you would need to hack a Bitcoin key, to, say, 10 to the 10, which is, or less, 10 to the 5, which is a really small number of steps that no matter what your clock speed is, you could do that very quickly. Whereas also, no matter what your clock speed is, you can't do the 10 to the 38th quickly. So that's what an algorithmic speed is. And we only have one of those magic tricks, and it really is a beautiful magic trick. Peter Shor, MIT, a bit of a quixotic. Some may call him a top autist or top tist, as we say in my community. Peter Shor, really neuroatypical guy, came up with this brilliant, beautiful exploit of nature. And that's why people are excited about quantum. It's not for practical reasons. The scientific community understands that there's nothing out there that's going to win in quantum. My girl actually says it's like the Large Hadron Collider or CERN. You're happy it exists, but you wouldn't invest in it unless you want shares of CERN. It would be very awkward. So I think that's a really good way to look at it. And again, very happy to take on quantum bulls, but I've almost never met a quantum bull that really believes in their own BS. I think they understand that, in a lot of ways, they're taking advantage of that zeitgeist that we're in an exciting period for compute writ large, and that exciting period is kind of, should be, celebrated, but also isn't really something that's going to yield riches. I do think there are some approaches that might yield riches, but I think that we still have a long ways to go on all of these fronts. So I don't know that if you want to pause there and
Yeah, I think out before last year we didn't even have real quantum computers because they couldn't really do anything. What they were doing was they were doing something called sampling, which was where they just track the state of a quantum bit and then they compare it to a computer, a traditional computer, simulating that and comparing them and being like, look, the computer knows its own state. The quantum computer knows its own state better than the simulation on a traditional computer does. That's kind of like me holding 5 fingers behind my back and being like, hey,
Yeah, yeah.
how many fingers am I holding? And the guy guesses, and you're like, well, I knew it 500 million times faster than you because I knew it instantly, and it took you like 5 seconds.
Right, right. No, the circuit sampling, the boson sampling is definitely a scientific fraud, basically. But even if you were trying to sort of, do that, you know, excuse that, I still think you're in a, really bizarre sort of place where, my favorite thought experiment is what would you do if you had a quantum computer right now? And when I talk to people and they say, well, I do some calculations really fast, I say, which ones? And almost never is there a real answer here. And it belies this understanding of what computing really is. And, computer science people sort of know what it really is. They have an understanding of this because that's their profession. But I think the average Joe has no clue. And that makes it really, really tough for, people to size up whether this is a good investment or not. But I've started to come around to this idea that maybe this is rational, that maybe if you're the average Joe and you saw Nvidia go up to, say, what is it, 5 trillion or something, that you don't know, and I don't know, and you don't know on the call here. One doesn't know what the heck is the future will hold, and I think that's actually quite reasonable perspective because how could you know? So why not buy a little bit of this trash company, a little bit of that trash company, and pray that somehow that will add up to something. And I think that's you know very, very reasonable from the perspective of a novice investor. I mean, why not, right? Why not think of it that way? And maybe in 10 years you'll have the next Nvidia, and that's not long to wait. So I think that's very reasonable. And in fact, it kind of makes me start to think, okay, well, what else should we be doing if that's the case? Why not try to make the most of this excitement and try to build real next generation computers and ask ourselves the question, what is coming after NVIDIA? Because it's probably not NVIDIA. The same way NVIDIA sort of, surprised everyone in the, sort of Intel, Wintel sort of monopoly, thought that'd go on forever, and it didn't. So where do we stand, in terms of next generation compute? What does that look like is almost a better question. I don't think quantum's ever going to get there for obvious reasons, but it's still, I think this whole odyssey where I've lost, personally lost millions of dollars, trying to figure this all out. This was actually kind of an interesting insight for me, despite the painful loss of money. It's an insight to me that maybe we are ready to start having this discussion about a post NVIDIA world, and I think that's kind of exciting because I think if that's the case, and the world is ready to think about post NVIDIA, there's something for entrepreneurs to do, and there's something for investors to do, because ultimately I think that's what we're talking about here, is money. Interestingly, none of the AI companies have shown any interest in quantum whatsoever. So I think that is very telling about quantum's potential for compute, because there's so much desperation for compute at companies like OpenAI, Anthropic, and so forth. They're willing to do ASICs. They're willing to do all kinds of GPUs, LPUs. They're willing to invest in things like next generation, energy supply just to power them. If they're that convinced that we're going to need that much energy, then why the heck aren't they trying quantum? And the obvious answer is, they're not interested in quantum because it can't do anything in terms of bandwidth. It can't do anything in terms of algorithmic efficiency. These qubits aren't stable. I mean, there's nobody serious out there that thinks quantum can actually be a great compute substrate. Now, what's after that, I think is really interesting and important. And I think there's a lot of sort of non-von Neumann or other types of strategies that we can exploit to maybe get around some of these bottlenecks that I think we didn't foresee.
On the ASIC bit specifically, I think like a post NVIDIA world will just kind of be ruled by China. Not gonna lie, I feel like that's kind of where things are going at the moment, because I can't really think of any European or in general Western companies that can kind of like do all these things. So I think like it's probably just going to come out of China, and I think ASICs are going to be the future anyways. because like we're just using these things. It's like Bitcoin basically. It's just like Bitcoin, right? People were using just like general compute to mine this stuff for ages until eventually, hey, why don't we just fucking use ASICs instead? And it makes a lot more sense. So eventually, you're just gonna have basically more purpose-built compute because there is demand for it anyways. So like. I wonder who's going to be doing that, and I don't know of any like Chinese company that will be doing that, but they're like actively working on it, and they're the ones that have a really good understanding of like hardware itself to the point that they can create optimizations for hardware that are better than the very optimizations made by the companies that actually make the hardware itself. Like that's crazy to me.
Yeah, I mean, I think that there's still hope for America. I think that we can probably figure out a way to get get new machines and get them in a place where you know we may not need this Taiwan bottleneck. I'm not a geopolitical guy, but like obviously having the world's economy, hinge on this tiny island next to China is probably not such a great place to be. It doesn't take a political theorist to see that, I guess. But so what can we do outside of this? And I think that there had been, there's been, a lot of rich, not non von Neumann approaches, and it may be time to.
Do you think there is enough political capital, especially with what's going on right now, to bring the Taiwanese people that are actually in the semiconductor business into the US? Because I'm seeing a lot of anger from Americans that are even against these fucking semiconductor people from coming in. So I think just based off that, I'm not super optimistic.
Yeah, I mean, I think we don't need Taiwan. I think that America's got an ability to innovate, and that there could be a way to actually make a new kind of computer. I don't know what that looks like, but it could be any number of things that really could change the game and how we think about the computer world. And I hope that there is an effort here that will create this idea of a new computer. And what it looks like exactly, nobody knows, but many ideas have been thrown around there, and we'll have to see if there is a you know if there is an avenue here that could make sense. So I'm excited that there are efforts ongoing, and potentially could be sort of implemented in the not too distant future. So I think we should probably double down on non-trad compute, because ultimately, I mean, think about where the limits are in transistor-based compute. I mean, they're in physical limits that are really just not possibly traversable unless you try a new kind of you know new kind of compute, which ultimately, why are we going at 3 gigahertz a second or 4 gigahertz a second? Why can't we go faster than that? And I think we have to
We
ask the.
can go we can go faster than that, but the problem is when you go that fast, the heat that is generated, it makes it completely unreasonable to go that fast. We have chips that are very specialized,
Totally.
that are single core, that go much faster, but it just doesn't make sense for the average person because you would be spending more electricity on actually cooling your chip
So let's
than you
go.
would be on the
Let's
actual.
let's Yeah, so let's move to a non some other metric, some other framework that doesn't necessarily use transistors. There are a lot of substrates. The heat. You're right that there's a heat wall there, and it's impossible to traverse. So what are we going to do about it?
Yeah, but the problem is when you're talking about moving something to something completely different, you're talking about investing trillions of
Yeah.
dollars
Yeah.
and replacing infrastructure that's already existed. And by the time your new technology manages to catch up with the old,
Right, and
it's
we've done it,
already behind
but we've done this
because
before, right? I mean, they had to go from.
not to this scale, not to this scale. This
Maybe. I
is
mean, I think it's doable. It's ambitious, but I think to go to, for example, I'm a fan of optics, but you can be a fan of memristors. There's so many different um, ideas in next generation computing. Um, what exactly to do, I don't know. Of
well,
course.
I mean, for you to replace what you have right now, it doesn't need to just be better. It needs to be better now.
Right, no doubt about that. At the same time,
If you're just like it's going to be better in a theoretical future time if we invest $10 trillion into it,
right, right.
no one's going to put that money in unless you can
Well,
somehow
look at
convince
quantum.
the
Well,
government.
hold on, because look at quantum. IonQ's raised $3 billion.
Yeah, but
On that very
that's
premise.
amount. That's tiny amounts. You're talking
Well,
about when you're talking about something like semiconductors, just on the fab,
right, but
they're spending
you're
14.
indexed to a very, and I'm not trying to fight, by the way. Uh, you're indexing yourself to semiconductors, where you know, I assume when innovations happened in the past and there have been major wins, that's what productivity is all about. Can we index ourselves to a new process that won't be what it looks like right now? That will look like something maybe a lot more efficient, and
But
instead of
you're kind of missing, I think you're kind of missing the point because even if it's more efficient, even if it's better, for you to come in and be like, hey, not only are we going to make better chips now using a completely new process, but we're also going to need to move the entire world to this new process. All the software,
sure,
all the hardware, all the vendors,
sure.
all the governments.
Look at what
This is going to cost trillions of
what's
dollars,
TPU doing.
even if it's a better technology.
I mean, TPU is doing just that,
Yeah,
and
but the TPU is a specialized device.
understood.
It's a specialized device that it is connected to your CPU and GPU, right?
Sure.
And it's still based off our transistor technology. It's not a completely brand new
Yeah, no, and,
technology.
and and that's my point is that why with some really big new idea, there's no reason to believe that we couldn't try for something bigger. And just as as an innovator, I mean, the point that nobody's done it before isn't that doesn't work. There's nobody ever made a laser before either, and there are always new ways to do things and exploit the laws of physics that result in success. I think people told Elon there's no way they could launch a rocket. I think just to dismiss any possible innovation is not
Yeah, but my point is the innovations of the past have usually been built on top of the things that have come before it.
not necessarily. Look
No
at
one,
wireless. Wireless is a good example where do you remember the whole trope of like Korea and some other countries that they skipped the idea of like having fiber in the ground and other they had no telecom infrastructure and they just started with wireless better off kind of never having the vestigial kind of like attachments. So I'm just saying that it's important to be open minded. There's obviously
yeah, but even wireless that you're talking about right now, it still relies on cables
for
underground
us,
to
yes,
go to the towers. Yes, but that still is using the underlying technology that I'm
fiber
talking about.
optics.
We've, yeah, no, not fiber optics specifically, but going to the tower and the tower, the wires that go to the tower and the towers that then give you the 5G,
Fiber optics.
the four, 4G. But it's my point is that it's we're dealing with technologies of the past that are then drive us into the future when we need something new. When China came in and they
Well,
just
let
adopted
me try.
mobile phone
Let me
payments, right? Yes, they skipped credit cards, but that was because people dealt with credit cards first. They were like, this is kind of a shit system. Let's make something better. But you can see how well credit cards have stuck around in the West.
Yeah, I mean, I think that this line of argument is basically saying, you can't do technology, and I think there's always a way to do technology, and one of the things you can do, for example, is atomize, what it is you're trying to optimize. So a good example is the map mole. This is the workhorse of today's economy, multiplying two n by n matrices, or n by m matrices, I should say. And how do you do this faster? Well, this is an n cubed problem in computing. N cubed is, if it's a 10 by 10 matrix, it's 10 cubed, just 1,000 steps to calculate this 10 by 10 multiplied by another 10 by 10 matrix. Obviously, as we get huge numbers of these dimensions, this scales pretty terribly. If you could make a device that just did map moles at um, a linear complexity, so just 2n instead of n cubed, you would change the entire world of computing. Now, you don't have to change any operating system. You don't have to change any networking. You don't have to change anything outside of just the map mole going faster. We have the abstractions that wrap around that. And I think that's the idea of quantum too, right? Is that We're not going to replace Windows with Quantum OS. We're going to just do, I guess, key cracking or whatever else these things will be good for. And you'll have a QPU, adjacent to a CPU or a GPU whenever you need to do quantum period finding, which will be never. But assume you have this magic matmul tool, and it's this little matmul semiconductor. Maybe it's a semiconductor, maybe it's optical, maybe it's a memristor, maybe it's magic, whatever it is. This little tool is something invented by you, and you are going to become a trillionaire, just like Jensen became a billionaire because he invented parallel computing. You've invented a new way to do matmuls really fast. This is the idea. It's not necessarily
We're
about
talking about specifically something that's application specific, right?
well, matmul is one algorithm, right?
For
It is literally
for AI, and this matmul would be for AI, right?
well, you'd use matmuls all over the place, including in graphics. But yes, I mean AI is the main place. Yes.
But I was talking more about general computing.
Okay. Well, there are no bottlenecks in the rest of general computing.
What we were talking about going from transistors to something else.
Right. Right. So this
So
is
if
that.
we're talking specifically about matmuls, that kind of
Well, that's where 99% of the effort is expended right now. That's why we are trying to build data centers to cover the errant waters of the earth, is that we are trying to do matmuls faster. And I, for one, don't like this idea that we're going to create nuclear reactors, that half of our cities are going to be data centers, that we want data centers on the moon and in space, when we can find a way to do matmuls faster. That is the better approach here. And I think resigning ourselves to, well, is it going to be NVIDIA that does the matmuls at n cubed, or is it going to be the TPUs that do it at 0.9 n cubed, when maybe we should be thinking about erasing that cube and replacing it with a squared or even no exponent. That's what I think would solve this huge computing bottleneck. And that's why quantum, this is what the investors are thirsting for, right? They're thirsting for who is going to, win this war of the long run, and who's going to look like NVIDIA did 20 years ago, and who can be that champion that solves this. And I'm not saying I know who it'll be or what approach it'll be. Nobody knows that. But I think that maybe one of the ways you could do that, which again, the data center is just sitting there doing matmuls all day, maybe you get off transistors. And this is what we did for comms, right? We used to send data over electrical lines. We don't do it anymore because it's not that efficient. It's better to do it over fiber optics. It's more bandwidth, and it changed the whole world, right? Internet, when it was over copper lines, was pretty shitty. I'm sure you remember. And now with this massive throughput advantage, internet's pretty awesome. I can see you, I can wave hi to you, we can send each other all the music in the world or whatever. So I'm just merely saying, is there a way to get, to do matmuls faster without necessarily, staying in the transistor regime? I think everyone's exhausted like algorithmic advantages there. There's like a n to the 2.65. It's a galactic algorithm. It's impossible to actually implement, but it is one way to do it. But how do we really transform the game on matmuls? That will change our economy. It'll change scale of GDP and so forth. And that's kind of, I don't want to get bogged down on this, but I think that's where I'm excited, and I think many VCs are excited. Having said that, like for example, we've seen Xtropic and some other kind of like very weird, different thermodynamic computing. Optical computing is very, very hot right now, as are, again, just non-von Neumann, neuromorphic. What are the ways that we can, do matmuls faster without, getting bogged down in
I've been thinking about neuromorphic too.
Yeah, there has to be a way, right? Like man will
Yeah.
win this. I don't think
There's all these fucking retards that are like, no, we can't have neuromorphic because it's gonna be too similar to human brains, and it's gonna be an ethical issue. I'm like, shut the fuck up, bro.
I think that's really funny because I was just inventorying what people are doing out there in this space, and I joked with my girl like, can you make matmuls? Can you do matmuls in animal brains? It's kind of this gnarly, probably good for Halloween and Frankenstein.
There's an adjacency to that actually, because people have been trying to use human brain organoids as compute. There actually already
Yeah,
exists
human
a
brain
kind of
cell.
solution for that. Yeah, they've been like doing.
Brain cell compute,
There's
yes.
Yeah,
there's
yeah.
some
So the Swiss companies, there's like the Swiss company that's doing this. There are a bunch of other
yeah
startups that are trying
there's
to do this kind of thing. But like these same people that are going, hey, we should like use neurons for compute, are also the same people who are saying, hey, we shouldn't just like do neuromorphic computing. I'm like, huh?
well we're
What?
doing it electronically. It's that's what a neural network is inspired by, right? So
Yeah,
it's a
exactly.
little bit silly to not use the architecture that God, so to speak, gave us. But I think that the bigger question is, can you use it in biological matter, which is a totally insane, concept. And
I think yes, but I think it's exceedingly unethical, and don't think anyone should be doing that, personally. I think that will open up a door to creating something that will be the undoing of us all, for many more reasons than just like creating a weapon, right? You're bastardizing nature to an extent that is like hitherto undreamt of. Like it's
and
crazy. You're going to be
it's
creating something really bad.
What do you think about DNA storage then?
well, I don't want to
Do
jump off this just yet because I think this is really interesting because I don't think that biological matter is really that great of a substrate, but I do think that it's worth exploring. The company Final Spark is the one maybe you're thinking of that actually has SaaS
Yes.
access right now. You can SaaS, you can actually um, use this right now as a and rent a biological computer, which is completely insane. And I'm going to look into some of this stuff, but they've so far they've gotten it able to play Pong and stuff like that. I mean, there's some stuff it can do, and most things it can't do, and it'll never be really precise. So there's a lot of like issues with that. But I am really curious about where this will go. Not because I think, like I said, it's some fantastic way to do things, but I do think that there is a kind of our brains are obviously doing lots of calculations, and the question is, can we learn from that? And to the extent that Hebb and
Yeah, like furthering neuromorphic compute by just kind of understanding how it works through mediums like this, right? Is that kind of the point? Like,
yeah,
yeah.
exactly. And
Yeah,
again,
I get that. I mean, we drown rats all the time, and we kill like a shit ton of mice. We also like skin a bunch of hamsters. So it's like, okay, maybe there is a little bit of leeway for the greater good. Who
yeah,
knows? Who
if
knows?
you can grow it in a vat and it's just cells, I think that's probably fine. I mean, I
Yeah,
don't.
like how alive is it really? That's usually the point.
Yeah.
Like, how alive is it really? Like, are you genuinely causing like actual spiritual pain to this thing? Because like if you're doing that, then that's going to be problematic. And I think like as soon as you reach a certain level of complexity with these kind of like neurons, what ends up happening is that you have like this emergent kind of this soul-like structure, and that's where the problems start
Oh,
beginning.
totally. Yeah. I think
This
that
is where the demons come in. So
yeah, I'm with you. I think that it'd be unacceptable in every way. But I will say, you know, there is still this question of is it possible? And you know, if you want to get really Frankenstein, the idea is like, can you take like the closest biological animal, or even something that's like people use pigs in pharmaceuticals and other like higher order species to actually get an animal to compute for you. Whatever mathematical thing you're trying to compute. And again, not something I'm interested in, but it's definitely an interesting mental experiment of a thought experiment. If is it even possible? What is the limit of biological matter and computing? Because ultimately, that's where we're going, right? The first time people did neural networks, they said there's no way this is a good idea, and
yeah, because it just
inevitably,
didn't have the computer at the time as well.
right?
Like it made sense. People thought it made sense even in the 1920s. But it's like, okay, well, we don't have the computer for this. Totally unrealistic. And then we did have the computer. It's just like, oh wow, holy shit, this actually works really, really well.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. That's the story, and I think the closer we get to maybe biology, which is obviously we've gotten pretty close with the way we do AI right now, but getting it closer and closer and closer to a point where it's like really there will be fun to sort of see. In terms of DNA, I like DNA. I think DNA has got
Yeah, yeah. DNA data storage is makes a lot of sense. It's not really like alive in a sense that it has a soul or anything like that. Maybe I'm wrong about this, but it really is an interesting thing that like stores information by default. I mean, that's literally what it's meant to
right,
do. It's supposed
right.
to like store information and like carry a blueprint effectively for like some sort of construction. So like DNA storage makes a lot of sense. Like if you can make that better than like a fucking NVMe, then yeah, go for it, man. I think that's a really good idea.
Yeah, I've been trying to read some papers on like what enzymes would you use to process
Yeah.
information with, because it's sort of still not clear how do you unspool that DNA. Obviously our body finds a way to do it, and it does it in this like somewhat fault tolerant way. If it's too fault tolerant, then you get cancer. But it's somewhat fault tolerant. So it'll be interesting to see how that sort of plays, because I do think there's a lot of potential there. Although again, this is probably longer term. Microsoft's invested a lot in this space. That's
I'm
their
curious. I'm curious what you two think about DNA storage.
that's
Well,
what
we
we're
just said
talking
that.
about. Yeah, yeah. So
I
so
think
Like,
did we cut out? Did we cut out?
yeah, a bit.
yeah. So I guess the
Oh,
question with DNA storage is can you reliably get it to sort of give you the answers you want? So in databases, there's a lot of like, what's your read time, what's your error rate, how much do you have to go through, the data such that you can actually know that what you've, what you're what you can't search, for example. There's no great search tool for this stuff yet. So all that would have to be built out. It's kind of to your earlier points, right? That this doesn't exist yet, and it would take a
Yeah.
really really long time for us to get rid of our cheap storage. And tape drives are quite
But
economic and hard to.
the point is that you can store a lot more on like a gram
Yes,
of
a football field.
DNA than.
It's a football field of tape versus a maybe a size of a grape of DNA. So really really big delta there.
Yeah,
And for archival purposes, why not? And it lasts longer. I mean, human, DNA in general
can
has
last
lasted,
thousands of
yeah,
years.
yeah,
Can last
maybe
thousands
even
of
more.
years.
So I think that's an exciting new next gen tech. And again, I think the quantum bubble tells us that people are really excited about doing something different. And one thought experiment I asked my friends is, would you have invested in Nvidia 20 or so years ago, knowing if I told you that AI would be really important and they'd be the category killer and our whole economy would be based on it, et cetera, but there'd be no profits for 25 years or 20 years. You just have to sit and wait, and all you would see is like flops per watt going up or something like that, which you would understand is like you're behind Intel, and everyone will always say you'll never beat Intel, and then eventually you beat Intel, and then eventually this new magic new sort of thing comes about. Well, that's almost exactly what quantum is right now, right? Like that is what is largely being sort of thrown around, is like you're behind, don't know when, but eventually you'll be ahead, and we don't know when, but eventually there'll be an application.
But the difference is that when Nvidia came out, there was a ton of companies that were working on the same issue,
Sure.
right? So you have to pick the correct one.
Yes, yes, that's what makes the quantum stuff even more flabbergasting, because it's like, well, okay, maybe one of these guys will be worth something one day, but how do you know it's?
And when Nvidia first came out as well, they were behind everyone else.
Yeah, I have to ask my
They
father-in-law, who, believe it or not, my father-in-law worked there for 20 years, and has a lot of fun old stories about Nvidia.
Yeah.
Um,
I watched it from Jensen Huang himself. He's like, when we first started, everyone picked the right technology except us. So so he was talking about how they were actually behind all the other graphics companies
yeah,
for a bit.
would your father-in-law is a father-in-law, right? Did I catch
yeah,
that correct? Would your
yeah.
father-in-law be comfortable with coming on an X space or something like that to talk about the kind of these origins? Because that would be really
I'm
interesting.
I'm sure he would, but ultimately, I think that his position on it would be, I can tell you all the old war stories, but at the end of the day, a lot of this stuff is kind of now gone in the history books, and maybe what's more interesting is what's coming up. And I think the early days of Nvidia, how it all happened, it's been somewhat chronicled. Um, you know, I think it's a lot more interesting to see where we're going from here, because I think one of the cool things about map moles, and this is what I'm explicitly working on, literally at the moment, is if you could do a map mole faster. Let's say, like I said, you could do it in linear time instead of exponential time. You really would change just everything about the world. And so if you just zoom in on this one equation, that's all you need to solve. And it sounds easy, but it's not, obviously. Um, the reason I'm saying this is because if you look at the reasoning paradigm, this sort of recurrent reasoning, kind of almost a loop that many discovered before even OpenAI operationalized it in '03, but this sort of chain of thought and reasoning models that are literally maybe like ELO-wise, ELO 1,000 points higher, and maybe IQ wise, I don't know, I would say 20 or 30 IQ points higher than the straight old school GPT-2 read through to the final layer kind of model, where you just have, whatever the output layer spits out, that's what you get. That huge improvement is based on just feedbacking into the same series of matmals. So what stops intelligence possibly from growing to super intelligence is just how fast can you do this damn multiplication. And if nature is converged on the neural network as our supreme processing, sort of architecture, which at least it seems from our brains that that's the case. Now, could there be something better? Sure, airplanes are better than wings. Um, so maybe there is something even better out there. But ultimately, if we could get this part really, really fast, when you ask ChatGPT or Anthropic or pick your favorite one, to answer a really tough question, it'll sit there and think for 5 minutes. In those 5 minutes, it's doing trillions of matmals or billions, maybe trillions. And the question is, what if I asked it to do, quintillions or add many, many more orders of magnitude? What could come out? Could Fermat's last theorem equivalent type work come out? We saw recently an ex DeepMind guy kind of, I don't know what you want to call it, but he tried to present a Navier-Stokes solution, largely seemingly through AI. Maybe things like that will actually happen, in the near future. New materials, new pharmaceuticals, things like that. So it really does all rest on this, and transistors are not done by any means. I think it's just a
Yeah, but
question
that's
of
also why
like,
we're talking about neuromorphic computing, right? Because also
right,
one of the issues with like, okay, you're not running like trillions of iterations in your head right now. You're physically incapable of doing exactly that. Yet you can come up with more complex things than
right,
ChatGPT with all of the internet's like archive data. It's like, ChatGPT didn't come up with like TSMC, right? For instance, none of these things existed beforehand. Like all
right,
of these things were built, created, and thought of by humans, right? Or like probably over sent us, who knows, right? But still, it came from the brain somehow. And so maybe the whole thing is not just about making things faster, but figuring out a way how networking actually works by saying, hey, we have like, even in the brain, you have like areas of the brain that are designed for specific purposes, and they all like work together very, very well. So they're very well networked, which is also interesting because if you have a person who's like, definitionally dumber, right, they have a bad network, right? Their brain structure is bad. So like if you look at like, so for instance, autistic people are really good with like, computation because they kind of are like computers in a sense. They're like, I have
right.
a few bits missing, and so they basically networked a whole bunch of other things together, and so they could just like, go band for band with like the most insane bullshit and have like insane context windows and just like, do what we're doing right now. So, well, like, higher functioning autism, not the one that's like retarded. It's a whole spectrum, used to be known as Asperger's. Thought I'd need to clarify that, but yeah, I think it's like, it's not just about speed or like scale of the thing, but more
Right.
so about like how efficiently you can make that
Well,
happen. Like, what's the
or
networking
yeah,
solution?
what's the organization? What asks the systems to do their jobs, and how does it promulgate or like come up with those questions? And there's a great essay in the like less wrong rationalist, sort of community, which I abhor, but sometimes they have some good ideas. And one of them is, is the internet conscious, and are corporations the form of superintelligence? Because if you think about the scale of effort and organization it takes, the capitalist sort of gradient results in some of these inventions happening. To do this, the promise of money was one of the key gradients that sort of allowed some of these things to
Well, it's
succeed.
kind of like a company is kind of like networking if you think about it. The
Right,
most effective company just does like, if you imagine it like a brain, you could say that like different departments and people within it, like, okay, so departments are areas of the brain, and then people within that department are neurons, and then basically all of these neurons need nutrition. So if they do a good job, they get more nutrition. If they don't, they get replaced by something else, right? Like, this kind of, it's similar to how the brain works, although that you have like damaged neurons, they get like replaced. That's why when you drink alcohol, parts of your brain actually die a little bit. So it's like things like that,
Actually,
basically.
this is the Jeffrey Epstein.
it's quite interesting. It's quite interesting that when you look at a lot of these public companies, they're actually very, very badly run,
Yes.
but they still somehow
Right,
work.
right. That's it. and
It
and
Because their
sometimes
brain structure is incredible, right? You got like
a,
so many good neurons down there.
a lot of times they're abusing moats, and that's sort of the Buffett-esque approach of like, it doesn't matter how dumb the CEOs are. If Coca-Cola's taking the world by storm, it's going to take the world by storm, and it'll never change. Even somebody trying to literally damage Coca-Cola couldn't do it. It's that good. And I was going to mention that some of what you're talking about is the Jeffrey Epstein best buddy Marvin Minsky's old theories on the brain as well. I feel bad for all the MIT guys that get caught up in uh, taking Epstein's money, literally all of them, Chomsky and all their Harvard guys too, Summers. It's just an incredible thing how he infiltrated not just the wealthy world but also the science world. Um, but in any event,
Guys, we're there for snorkeling. We promise.
it reminds me of Minsky at least. But I think that your organization of it is really important. And the question is, can you have like many AIs trained on many different corpuses, and the capitalist AI is kind of the ultimate, still the ultimate gradient winner because it'll allocate compute to where it's most efficient. And I think there's some reason to believe that. And this sort of dovetails with Elon's point here, which is like, could you make billions of more humans through robotics? And they also now have that volition and desire to maximize certain things like capital or whatever they're sort of programmed to maximize. And I do see, like, for the first time in my life, I really believe in this like singularity kind of concept. But I do think the Matt-Mole barrier needs to get broken, and that'll sort of be where civilization will take off. And right now, I think the general plan is just power through it with more of the same, which we need an exponential step function, not just a
Yeah, right. But also at the moment, you have like this current problem where people see and identify a singularity and it's objectively true, but it's not the singularity that was initially sold to us. Like the initial singularity was like the definition that you'd have like data and you have like these computation systems that would like basically come up with new types of things all the time. And it would
right.
just become this like fully recursive loop of infinite improvement. You don't really see that at the moment, but what you do see is the singularity of energy and resources. That's all you're seeing right now. Like, there's like a ton more data centers. There's a ton more energy being like allocated to these data centers. It's getting so bad that even the hippies are being cast to the wayside and people going, hey guys, I think we need nuclear power again. Like maybe we don't need to concern ourselves with the thing that physically cannot turn into a fucking nuke and maybe just like use it. Oh, by the way, we also have ways to use nuclear waste now. So how about we just fucking do that immediately before somebody else takes our lunch?
And this
It's like
this
we're debating about
explains.
who's going to get the cookie here. It's like, oh, fuck it. We'll just figure that one out later. Let's just capture it. Let's capture it for ourselves. We can like figure all the bits and pieces out later. That's kind of like what's
And
going on
look,
right now.
this is what explains quantum. The quantum sort of bull run is, is illogical as it is, and you can wax on, how dumb it is till the cows come home. The share prices. I mean, I think I've told every single financial institution on Wall Street about what I think about quantum, and it has not changed a bit because at the end of the day, the major question is, what's out there that can solve this problem. This problem is huge, and even if there's a chance that we come up with a new quantum algorithm, or a lot of people say, even Peter Shor said, there are cases of algorithms that were not able to be discovered until the computer was available to test them on. And while I disagree with that a little bit, I think it's probably true that if you had a quantum computer you could hack around on, you could probably come up with a quantum algorithm a little more easily and certainly test it
On
a little
that
more
same
easily.
on that same notion, I have to ask, what do you think about the whole Beth Bezos like extropic thing? What do you think about that?
Yeah, so he's a friend, and I think that you know you can't short a private company. So to me, when I look at private companies, I just wish them the best. And as a friend, 100%, it's 100x, where I want him to win. So however any way I could help him or whatever, I extend myself as much as I can. But I also acknowledge that startups are extremely risky. So I don't know 100% how things will pan out. I think he was a little bit surprised when, and we should get him up here because he's sort of an expert on all things compute. I think he was a little surprised when Unconventional raised a $500 million
Is he
round.
here?
If he's
I,
here,
I don't think he is.
no, I mean in general, just get him up.
Yeah, yeah,
Get
yeah.
him.
We could do like a follow up at some point if you'd like to do that. We can like
Yeah,
probably do
whole.
that next week or some other day. Depends.
There's a lot to talk about. Compute is just
Oh yeah.
one narrow thing, but Unconventional raised 500 from A16Z, and this was the Nirvana founder. So Nirvana was I was in jail at the time, avidly watching this. Nirvana was Intel's neuromorphic acquisition, and this was this has still never seen production. Interestingly, so Intel made a bunch of acquisitions, like really forward-looking acquisitions that were kind of exciting, and they were never able to productize it or tape out in some cases. So, you know, he then he sold Nirvana, great success. He started something called Mosaic ML, sold that to Databricks, which is largely an A16Z company, and now has Unconventional AI, which sounds like it's just analog compute. And if you watch their pitch, it's the same exact thing I've been saying for the last hour, which is we need to try something else. Let's not ship H100s or B100s or V100s or R100s into space, and it's sort of a nutty idea, but it may be all we have, unless someone like Unconventional, which has an eye-popping 5 billion valuation. And you might ask yourself, okay, well, IonQ's 10 billion or 20 billion. Unconventional is a company that literally just started, but it has a good CEO, and it's worth 5 billion. It gets back to my point of like, somebody wants this big win, and the big win could be worth more than 5 trillion. And if you get the big win, it's arguable that you've ushered in a new phase of computing that, back when Nvidia was trying to gain ground, it was not very clear that you needed a graphics processor, and it certainly was far from clear that AI would happen. And you would need parallel processing to do it. And so now we kind of know what the sort of trophy is. The trophy is really important, and we know whoever gets it will immediately have orders, like OpenAI and all these other companies will immediately buy your chips and throw away their Nvidia chips. Instead of a football field, maybe it's a server rack. Wouldn't that be great? Everyone will be happy. Environmentalists, the companies, the users. The only people that'll be unhappy are maybe data center people and Nvidia people. But that's creative destruction for you. So the question is, will it be Unconventional? Will it be Beth Bezos? Will it be me? Will it be you? Will it be whoever? And I think Beth is his thing is like, it's a very, like, I don't quite understand it, but it's a really neat idea about using the randomness in nature to sort of exploit certain computational algorithms. And again, until you could do MatMul, I'm not sure what we really need some of this for, because like we kind of know what what the ask is. Now, one of the big asks, as you may know, is also the bandwidth between chips, and that's increasingly gone optical. And to the extent that's sort of getting that's a bottleneck that's being sort of relaxed. There is some excitement there too, but I don't know. It's it's a crazy new world, and adapting to it and learning it from a from being a biopharma drug expert and skipping into this space over the last decade or so has been a lot of fun.
Damn, I couldn't like unmute fast enough. Jesus Christ.
Yeah, for some reason I couldn't hear what like some of what he was saying because they kept cutting out.
Yeah, I didn't have. I think maybe we're ready for the next topic.
I hope the recording is going to be awesome because like that's probably going to be the only thing that's like actually definition, like high definition is going to work out. I don't know. It's really gay.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, yeah, I can hear you. I can hear you because
Yeah.
the host connection is
Yeah.
the one that actually hears the most. So
Okay. Yeah.
yeah,
So what
it's
else
the
did you
fun
want
bit.
to chat about?
Well, I think it was like after we addressed some of the compute stuff, and I think we can probably even do a follow up on that at some point in the future because that's an ever growing thing. It's really interesting to talk about that. Let's talk about economy. Let's talk about economy. I think like kind of where things going, we're going to see a large correction because the countries that normally had done all of the manufacturing no longer do it, for instance, and there's kind of like this race to bring it all back. And I think this is currently being done, especially by America, in a way that is way too quick, and therefore it will burn more bridges than you will have the ability to build bridges in the future to kind of like ensure that dominance is retained. What do you think about that? Like general gist, because you have like this speak of golden age and all these things, but when I look at it quantitatively, I can't really figure out how to put that together in a way that it makes sense. So, what do you think?
I guess from the AI perspective, I think the economic benefits will take decades, because old business processes stay around for much longer than we give them credit for. But I think that and there's a J curve. Like you lose money implementing some of the early efforts, and then when you figure out how to really use these systems, you get them. So I think it's really tough for presidents and people like that to like lay claim to too many successes because they're decade long planning things. And that's why Singapore kind of had this big success. I think we were talking about that the other day, that um, if you can plan a country's outlook for 20 years and not have somebody tear it up 4 years later, it sure would be nice. And it's especially unproductive to literally, have it switch every 4 years. That feels like, really, really frustrating.
That's one of the arguments of the Singaporean government. It's that like a lot of people say it's not really a democracy because the same party keeps winning every fucking year. Every fucking time there's an election. Not every year, but um like the Singaporeans argue that that just means that the party is actually pretty good and effective at doing their job and they can actually plan for longer. Right? It's not a sign that there is no democracy. It's a sign that the party is actually doing a good job.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of nuts to just tear up the playbook every 4 years. I mean, imagine in 4 years we see, kind of the, I don't know, anthropic people in the White House, and people like that. They say, well, it's all about AI safety now, and AI is going to be regulated. And then 4 years later, we're more, I don't know, techno optimist people go into the White House, and they say to hell with these AI regulations. Everyone should be able to do whatever they want with AI, and you keep changing it every 4 years. You're just going to end up with stasis that lets other people, rightly or wrongly, exceed you, whether the right answer was A or B. The worst answer is neither. Pick a direction and go. And I think that's kind of dangerous. And the same thing applies to tariffs and things like that. So America's kind of cooked in some of these ways unless we really pick on a direction and go. At the same time, we have really unique frameworks for capital formation and entrepreneurship that are obviously kind of unparalleled. So hopefully, we don't mess with that engine. But I kind of think we are in a golden age in some ways, and Elon's 750 billion is a good sign of that. That we're starting to get into this like post money world, which is he starts to bring this up now every time he's asked that none of this is going to make a difference. At some point, we're not going to have universal basic income; we have universal high income, and that all the things that we need to live are going to be provided for. And I really do believe that. And to the extent you call that a golden age, I'd say sure. That is a golden age.
Okay,
What
but here's the problem though. Who
Wait,
defines? Wait, go ahead, Ada.
yeah. Wait, so you actually believe in universal basic income? You think
I
that's
believe
gonna
I believe in the singularity. Um, in terms of UBI, I think that sounds like inflation to me, unless you have this like economic engine that's so profound that it could it can sort of create something out of nothing. And we're not there yet. But I think again, I'm not a geopolitics person. I'm not even a sort of economic social theory person. But I do think that to the extent that you have somebody worth $750 billion and growing, it does. And then you have a welfare state that has largely succeeded. We can exist in this weird sort of UBI like we're almost already in a UBI state. Um,
what welfare state are you talking about that
America.
succeeded? How is America's welfare state something that succeeded?
We're all functioning. There's very little poverty. In many ways, it's a hybrid corporate government state. And again, this is not like some high conviction thing for me. Like I said, I'm not a social scientist, but we barely have to work in America anymore, and we can make ends meet. It's really an incredible shift. I think YouTube, TikTok, Facebook, and other companies that provide quote unquote influencer, what we're doing right now, you can get by on a very minimal amount of work via those companies, and then also via productivity improvements, and then finally via government handouts that are provided for by people like Elon or anyone in Scholar pays taxes. And it
Yeah,
seems
but
to have largely
right
worked.
now, right now that system doesn't really work. Most people are barely functioning. They can barely afford food. They don't have enough money for housing. They don't own their own
Where do
home.
you live?
And the welfare. Right now I'm in the U.S.
Where?
But well, I'm not going to disclose that. But and this doesn't apply to me
Yeah,
specifically.
yeah.
I'm just talking about the average person. Which is part of the reason why Trump got elected in the first place, because there was all these people that were pissed off about the fact that they couldn't afford anything under Biden.
Yeah, I don't see the same America you
And
do. We have record low unemployment, record high wealth. Our GDP has grown
I mean,
dramatically.
those numbers are all very misleading. Firstly, the GDP is only increasing because of AI. Everything other than AI is decreasing. Secondly, the unemployment rate is extremely misleading because the unemployment rate only counts people that are actively looking for work
Well, we have many unemployment rates.
and actively looking for work,
There's
and
there's a lot of
they're
unemployment.
making a minimum. They're making a minimum amount of money that's way below the minimum wage. So if you're making if you're making like $100 a week, that excludes you from unemployed,
Well, there's all definitions of
right?
unemployment. You have
And
U1,
if
U2,
you've if
U3,
you've
U4,
given
U5,
up,
U6. So you can look at
yeah,
any
there's
of
six.
those,
Yeah,
and they're all
yeah,
very
there's
low.
six, but it's it's close to, I think, 4% now, right? And that's not record
I mean,
low.
that's amazing. It's close to record low. I think record low is like 3.5 or something.
But that's, you're not counting the fact that a lot of people have just given up on finding
Well,
work.
then you have to look at the other unemployment metrics, and those are also close to a record low too. I mean, just because we can't have 100% full employment, which I think even Keynes would say that it's not possible, doesn't mean America's not doing well. Again, our GDP is the highest. We have still have the most economic liberty. I don't know. I think America's doing fine. It's hard to argue. If we're not doing fine, who is? It's hard to imagine. Given our huge stock market wealth and all this stuff, you could argue it's a plutocracy, but at the end of the day, I think our needs are met. Trump did get elected, for a lot of reasons. Um, it's not 100% clear that it was only because there's a dissipating middle class or something like that. And again, I sort of pivot back to Elon, which is his comments, which are when people say, "God, you're so disgustingly rich, isn't that terrible?" His response is, "We're going to have money's basically meaningless. We're going to have so much plentiful, so much plenty that there's going to be basically nothing to want for, and that this is our future, and that whether I have a trillion or quadrillion or septillion, it does make a difference because money's just paper and doesn't mean anything anymore." And when you see things like Bitcoin, rise to $100,000 per fictional token, it sort of shows you that maybe we are in a post money world, or maybe just we have like a huge barbell of like massive wealth on one end and nothing on the other. But there's clearly something strange going on with the nature of money, given you know kind of some of these interesting signs we're seeing.
Well, there's a bunch of issues, right? First of all, you'll have the issue that if money is infinite, it's worthless. If and first of all, like the idea of having an age of abundance would mean that you get resources from somewhere, but eventually these resources are going to run out, right? That's another little bit. I don't think we'll ever live in a world where such a thing can actually exist. I think the US is like it's a really good example for many things. As a welfare state, I feel like it kind of has succeeded, but it's also kind of tearing itself apart because of that exact reason. Like it's a thing that's going to last for a bit until the current generation
Well,
goes, hey, why don't I have enough money? And just decides to not contribute to the pot of money anymore that's keeping all the people who are
the
useless alive.
welfare state, the welfare state is something that's spent $40 trillion in the last decades, and it has had no effectiveness in reducing the poverty of people.
Well, our poverty is pretty low, but I would going back to what you said, Adrian. The interesting thing there is that the current generation has moved on to a new currency. Very interestingly, they moved on to attention as the currency. Social media likes.
I think attention was always the currency, to be honest. It was just that we didn't have the technology that would allow us to maximize it at the time. That's what I would think, right? Like let's say the 1980s was pretty close to the information age, but people had magazines and they did to a certain extent have like phone connection, and you still had social status things, right? Like, for instance, you'd meet up physically in a place that you call a spot, right? That's how they used to call it. You meet up there, you do a whole thing, show off each other's trinkets or whatever the fuck you got going on, and then probably like wreck someone's car. Like that's kind of how the gameplay loop goes. Today we do it differently. Today we just meet up in simulations. We have virtual spaces like these, for instance, as well. Discord is like very popular amongst the youth now because of exactly this. It's like a place, mental, physical place that you go to meet other people with similar interests, right? So it's like attention is more valuable now, not because like it's a new thing.
Sure.
It's just because technology has enabled it to the extent that it is one of the optimal ways. Like individuals now have access to it. Before, attention was largely controlled by governments, right? And
Right, right.
major organizations made by people
News,
that
yeah.
controlled those governments.
Hollywood, news stations, so forth. And
Exactly.
if you ask kids who are in their teens today who they admire the most, it's not Elon or Palmer Luckey or even, a movie star. It's what's his name? Adrian Ross or Aiden Ross and
Aiden Ross.
Aiden
Yeah, Aiden
Ross.
Ross and what is Kai
Yes,
Cenat
yes,
and
these
the fucking
guys.
guy who barks around like a dog. What is his name? Show Speed.
All
Yeah.
these guys, and that's the hero now. It's because they have the most attention, they have the most riz, they have the most motion, as some of these kids say, and
Hmm.
it's fantastic, that that's their priority because I think it shifts the point that they're being provided for. And again, I think uh, we're asking a really important question here. Our colleague here is asking, are we sure that that's like an infinite plentiful good? Because this is all bull market talk, right? When shit hits the
No, it
fan.
isn't. Like, I mean, with it, with attention, which is like far more in supply than you think. Like, okay, so the attention market is pretty big, and you can just like grab bits of it, right? Like, there is more attention out there than there is money. The actual point of attention is turning that into something that is
But
useful,
what
right?
if
Like, if you can get attention, that's pretty good. But if you can't turn that into something useful, it's effectively worthless, right? Like, attention on its own isn't inherently valuable. What is valuable is what can be done
Of
with it
course, yeah.
once you have
But
it,
what if
right?
this is
So, like,
all BS and that debt markets come home to roost and we all this welfare has to be snipped away and we get back to a recession where we're reminded of this this fantasy is that we see in the bull markets at the top where we're thinking about quantum computing and covering the world of data centers in space and all that stuff just pops, some needle comes out and pops
well,
it
if you want to go down that path, let's discuss the eerie parallels that we have with the Roaring Twenties, right? Like, I think that by 2030 we're going to see one of the greatest recessions that's ever recessioned. And
right. And
you
then
take the most layman dipshittery way to explain it. That would
and
be
you'll
one of
have
the things that I think is
you
happening.
won't have time to follow your favorite influencer because you'll be in a coal mine somewhere.
Yeah, and I think that's actually kind of a good thing because at the moment, like, we kind of live in an age of abundance as it is, right? Like, as the thing that I always say when people say, "Hey, the economy
It's
is
an
pretty
age
bad,"
of
I always say that's like,
artificial abundance. It's an
Right.
age
yeah,
of
artificial
Have we
abundance.
just
Yeah,
borrowed
artificial
it?
abundance.
To his point, have we just borrowed it from the future, and that we're gonna have to pay the bill someday?
Mm, maybe a little bit, but like
I
what
think
at the
I
moment
think the answer
the
is
economy
yes.
isn't bad enough. Yeah, yeah. The economy isn't bad enough yet. Like when you still see like people always say, okay, the recession is coming like tomorrow. I'm like, no, because the fucking OnlyFans girl who's providing zero fucking value and is probably AI generated is generating more money than a guy who's like building the next digital brain that will be controlling all assets of
And
information in the
for
future.
what it's
So it's
worth,
like,
when
what?
I say welfare, I include stuff like that. That's like a proto welfare,
Okay,
a
fair
new
enough.
welfare, if you will, and you welfare. That's like this new form of corporatized, sharing of attention and
Yeah,
things like
also,
that.
I think welfare has been wildly inflated as well at the cost of the working person. Like, if you can get disability payment for fucking anxiety, I'm sorry. That's just too much
I
bull.
have
That's bullshit.
anxiety,
I'm
and
sorry. I'm
I'm offended
sorry.
by this.
Like, I mean, it's like when I first started like going on a space. The first time I was like on a 1,000 listener space, I was like super fucking anxious. But you power through it. It's like, okay, well, do I get a fucking disability payment or do I power
No,
through
that's
it?
not
It's like
that.
that doesn't make any fucking
I don't
sense.
mean to be pedantic. That's not exactly anxiety.
Well, yeah, in a sense, but like that feeling, you can beat it, right? It's been
Uh,
the same with other things,
it can
human
be tricky. It
interactions.
can be tricky. I think that
Yeah, it comes out in different
some
forms,
people
sure.
have a medical version of that that's really ugly, and there's not much they
Yeah,
could
that's also
do.
true.
And so, whatever it is that's debilitating, I agree with you that our society, look, that wouldn't exist, 100 years ago, right? Like, the nobody's that coddled, nobody was that coddled. So I'm with you on that. But yeah,
Yeah, like
that one hit
there's
home a little.
bad cases, of course, but I think that the majority of the cases that people think is like, okay, this is something that needs a payment, is like not
Right,
even
right, right.
shouldn't
I
even be
mean,
on the
a
scale.
great
That's
example
my
that
point.
bothers me a little bit is the idea of a trauma dog or what have you, an animal that you.
Emotional support
Yes,
animal.
yes, yes. That sort of.
Hey guys, don't mind me. I'm just gonna go on this plane, and this is my emotional support python. It may or may not eat your dog, but that's fine.
Yeah, I think that's a little bit silly. So we have those kinds of things, and you're right. Then welfare of even things like this is maybe a little too. I don't want to get politically incorrect, but like there are other things like that we've just as a society have said, yeah, maybe that's a good idea. That now we're starting to say, okay, this is a little crazy. This stuff is nonsense. Let's get back to a more trad way of viewing.
And I think we're going to see something like that with the UBI thing. I think we're going to see something like that with this as well. Because, like, okay, so let's say the basics of life are provided for you. So, what are the basics? Like, what kind? Let's start at nutrition, right? So, for a long period of time, your defined standard of nutrition by the FDA is such that it basically says, here's a thing that you can eat at this amount, and it may not immediately kill you, type of shit, right? So if you then have this expanded onto everything else, and you say, okay, now you get your like daily rations, but your rations are like subpar as fuck, and you have like the inverse food pyramid that's being shilled today, where you say, hey, we need to eat 80% proteins, 80% carbohydrates and 20%
Here's
proteins, as opposed to the other way around. It's
here's
like
the
that's what's
thing.
going to fold. That's what's going
Here's
to
the
be
thing too on the
become
food.
of us at some
Here,
point, right? If you have
here's
like
the thing
people
on the food
provide this for
too.
us.
On the food, the FDA comes in and they're like, hey, this amount per day is okay. So every single food item that you eat starts fucking including that shit at that level. And then you get like 10 times the amount that you were supposed to have according to the FDA because every single food item fucking includes it.
Yeah, it's like daily intake value, right? You can see the percentages of daily intake value. Like for instance, you can have like what is a 200 milliliter bottle of juice, right? And in it is like, here's the daily intake value of like sugar. It is 120% of that, right? Like how the fuck are you going to be drinking the whole thing without exceeding the daily intake value, and then of course, becoming inherently unhealthy, right? Like there's like then a statistics game that's going to be played. Plus the quality of the food is another thing. Because, like, okay, we can make super cheap food, but as the old saying goes, you get what you pay for, right? So the bread that you're going to be getting, for instance, comes from the most glyphosated field on the fucking planet. You're going to be eating that, and you're going to start breaking out in hives, and you're going to have like genetic deformities and all these kinds of things. That's what's going to end up happening when you have like these systems of government provide nutrition for you on your behalf. It's like the essentials of life. Okay, well, we have government housing. Well, okay, that's a little bit, it's still made this. It's still a house made out of paper, but I didn't have to pay for it, right? But when it comes to food, these are like you live with real life consequences where eventually it just becomes unacceptable. And I think that the whole UBI thing is like it doesn't take into account the fact that we have thermodynamics and that effectively energy will run out. And who's going to pay for that? Who's going to do the work? And I have seen what happens when people do nothing and get paid to do nothing. Like what comes out the other end is like a set of individuals who have an animosity for productivity will actually drag down the collective consciousness of society through their effectively uselessness, right? And that's kind of like where I see this going. It's a very social thing. Maybe I'm like too pessimistic about this, but that's kind of like how I see these things. Like I've seen what employment does to a person, but I've also seen what unemployment paid for does to a person. It's way worse. Hang on, did all of that go through, or did we have like some sort of issue?
I heard you.
Martin, you still there?
Yes, sir. Just don't have a lot
Did you
to
get it? Did
add.
you? Okay, yeah. Yeah, I get that because I feel like you're coming from the side where you kind of like this has to be a thing. I get this, and like this is a very unpopular opinion at the moment, like that I'm putting out there. I kind of risk myself in doing so as well because it's like saying, hey, Nvidia is going to have some competition in the future, like in 2024, 2023, where everybody's like, oh, if you say anything against Nvidia, we're gonna absolutely flatline you guys. Blah. Like it's kind of like that. I didn't say anything back then, so I'm going to say things now, right? Like that's how this works. Although I did say a few things, and then yeah, all right. Anything else? I think about we kind of talked about the economy, the economy bits. I think a fair bit. Um, Manufacturing. Let's kind of get into that so we can kind of round that out a little bit, and then we can probably get into more policy adjacent things, I think. And I don't mean like politics because that's just memetics, and we could discuss that objectively as well, but I don't think it's inherently productive at the moment because like it's a very charged topic beyond even the thing that I've just discussed, which is like very quantitative in nature. It's still kind of a touchy subject because it's like pseudo political. Manufacturing also has kind of become that in a way, but so how exactly is America going to retain or like actually return to manufacturing dominance? And what is it going to dominate on specifically? Because I think maybe it's just going to be weapons manufacturing, right? So is that the thing that they're going to be maximizing as much as possible, or will it be something else or both? Like that's kind of what I'm wondering. What do you think about that?
It's a good question. I mean, it's like, do we do something? Are we going to do things that, we're not good at, or do we let others sort of, do them? And I feel like, there's definitely, a lot of questions here as to what.
Like when I look at the military industrial complex, like a lot of people have this weird brain rot where they look at the military industrial complex and they say this whole thing needs to disappear. I'm like, actually, no, hang on. We could put, if we take this money, if we take that money, we put it into something else. Like, I mean, that's a lot of money, and there's a lot of
I
things
mean,
that could be done with that money, right?
the military is absolutely necessary. You need to defend your borders, and also the
Yep.
military is necessary for ensuring that you actually have trade between countries. But yeah, there is excessive waste and fraud in the U.S. military. That's why I think like companies like Anduril are actually an improvement over like
Oh,
a
totally.
lot of the contracts that you have right now, where it's like cost plus, where any the government just pays an unlimited amount of money, and if it goes over budget, that's fine. So yeah, there's also an issue with people being expensive in the U.S.
Yeah, that's a huge issue, right? Like, we have a great, sort of system with China. Obviously, it's sort of fraught with long term issues. Will we really be able to, keep this going over huge periods of time? I think that's kind of the ultimate fear, right?
Yeah, the Chinese are also quite clever in that they just take everything. Uh, right. If you manufacture
They're
any,
like an actual empire that doesn't really give a shit about whether or not people think it's an empire. They just go like, "Hey, we can make everything, but like cheaper and better and
yes,
faster. Here,
yes,
just take it." That's like their asymmetric form of warfare because they knew they couldn't win militarily. So they were like, "What can we do other than that? You can't really win culturally all that much either. You have to do that within your own borders. So how do you actually conquer the world? Well, you just make everything, right?
yeah, you make the entire
You just
world
make
reliant on
everything."
you. You make the entire world reliant on you.
I mean, look, how many operations are there actually like that the United States has where you go into Africa and you extract like a shit ton of lithium, for instance, right? Like America needs to kind of do the thing like it's a delusional empire at the moment. It thinks it wants to not say that it's an empire. It has people within it that don't want to be imperialist, but ideally, if it wants to retain its dominance, it has to become an empire, it has to be an empire, it has to acknowledge the fact that it is and act as such, because China is doing exactly this. They're going to all of these places, they're doing the strange business deals, and they're coming away with all the resources and they're just selling it back to everybody else. So they're like, "Hey, I have all the stuff. You're sitting on a shiny like mountain of gold. If you have all the gold and you just give it out, then it's like, okay, well, you just control everything, including the value of gold, right?" So America kind of has to do that, and I don't really see it doing that at the moment. That's the main issue, I think, economically, especially with manufacturing, right? Although there's hope still. I feel like maybe the government is willing to evolve a little bit technologically and invest in what is otherwise unconventional from companies that aren't part of its like legacy structure that's existed for the past 50 years, which you can see with deals like XAI, it's just Anduril, you know, Palantir, all of these things, right? So I think there's like a willingness to evolve, and that might actually save like a large portion of their dominance, if anything, if they maximize that, I think. I mean, hey, you can make all of the resources, but can you make all of the weapons? Your resources are useless without weapons, right?
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see how this plays out because in a lot of ways, some of the earlier criticism, this would be very useful to have a kind of a this kind of benefit of manufacturing that is in America. It sort of solves a lot of problems having this middle class. But what's middle class when a dude has $700 billion? It's sort of there's people that even aren't impressed by being a billionaire anymore. it's we've got to a point where there's so much excess in one dimension that it's hard to, like I said earlier, sort of determine what does this mean. Um, it's starting to lose a little bit of meaning when the amount orders of magnitude somebody might have in wealth is just so much more than some others that where are we going with it? But I do think a manufacturing base is kind of this like somewhat strategic, certainly a
I mean, it
strategic thing to
used to
have.
be that if you had $1 billion, everyone knew who you were,
Right.
and you could do whatever you want, and you could pay for whatever you want. Now, if you have $1 billion, you're still operating on a lot of the restrictions that
Right.
average people do, even though you have less restrictions on you than the average person. But you're still more restricted than someone that has 500 billion, 100 billion, you know?
Yeah, and this is the sort of the Warren Buffett point, which is, I use the same phone as you do, I eat the same food you do. There isn't some like magic thing that I have that you can't have other than maybe a private jet and control over some assets, which, that's kind of our, the main thing that, he's got that you can't have. If that makes sense. The disparity between, the billionaire and the average person has shrunk and shrunk and shrunk, and the wealth perhaps between them has grown and grown and grown, which makes you wonder like, well, what is the what is the point of being so wealthy? And I think as we mentioned earlier, some of the youth have said the same question and said, well, maybe it's just attention, and I can skip the wealth part because who needs it, and it'll just come with the attention, perhaps.
In some cases, this is true, but like the value of, I think it's less so about owning things as much as it is about being able to control things. I think that that's kind of always been the most important bit that people didn't understand is that it's not about stuff that is like publicly associated to you or like legally associated to you, but stuff that you have control over. I think like, I mean, why would you need money in the first place? Well, to eat and sleep in a nice place, but also to do things that allow for you to have some sort of security, right? The only reason why we have money is because we want to control bits and pieces of the world so that we are secure and any part of us that we like to protect is equally as secure and also in the future is secure if we happen to pass on, which we will. So it's
Allows
like
you to it allows you to use the resources to impact the world in the way that you want.
exactly, which is like one of the things you want to do within your life, like your order, right? In a positive way, that is. Not everybody shares the same sentiment on that, but is what it is. So it's largely, I think it's just a control game, and I think people are starting to realize that. That's why, like, sometimes attention, if it's like captured in the right way, is more powerful than money, because you can derive money from it. Yeah, sure, but you can also move things around without ever having even like given anyone money to do so, which is, I think, the most interesting bit that people don't initially
Yeah, we were
consider.
talking about it. We were talking about a few days ago. Remember when we said that you couldn't pay any amount of money to get the same attention that OpenAI got from the Ghibli thing?
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. We're also talking about like well, why like there was even yesterday. I think it was yesterday. No, it was the day before. No, it was the day. It was the day before yesterday. It was like the conversation. It was a discussion of like why did OpenAI like allow the video generation, Sora video generation at the time, to be so costly to itself? Well, basically because it was free advertising. You had all these like influencers and such that wanted to bring out a shiny new thing because everybody wanted to interact with Sora videos. That you basically just like had to give people the ability to create their own fucking content that they can then basically just like shill to the masses and then get more customers in. Therefore, right? That was the whole thing. It was like advertising. It cost them a whole bunch of money, but technically speaking, I think that they got more attention and more users off of that than they ever could off of an advertising campaign.
Yeah,
Because that was the advertising campaign.
absolutely.
Organic advertising campaigns are the best. I mean, there are demonstrations of this everywhere. Me, you, everybody. It's like, the speculative value of a thing is a lot higher if it has grown organically than if it had been like kind of accelerated. There's a lot of people that have been artificially, platformed that just kind of disappear and get destroyed within less than a year. Like Haley Welch, for instance, is a great example of this. The Weird Hawk to a girl, like, well, that bullshit, right? Like, rug your community once, everything completely gone. Like, the attention was so artificial that as soon as there was no market in doing that anymore, the whole thing just basically collapsed because, the bitch didn't retain anything. So there's like that's the value of attention. Like, and also what attention do you have? Like if you have, for instance, attention of people that can change a lot of things about the world, then it's infinitely more valuable, even though it's like smaller by mass, than if you had like a million retards, right? Like an army of retards is pretty good, but it's not as useful as like 1,000 people who control maybe 10% of the world's, resources, for instance, right? Even a billion retards wouldn't be as good.
Yeah.
That's kind of where we get into policy as well, because like that's just management of people, right? Like we have two sets of religions. We have like real religion, and there's like fake religion, which is law, right? Which exists for a good purpose and largely to manage, well, a very large majority of people that cannot manage themselves because they don't have any religion anymore. And that's like policy and then politics and all that kind of like goes around in a circle. And then people go, well, who's who? I'm like, well, you're all technically the same. Just one of you has a soul and the other one does not. And you have to figure that one out on your own.
Well, guys, I have to run. I don't know what other topics you want to discuss, if any.
No, I think we kind of like, I think we covered as much as we could. We could probably do a follow up in like a week or two, whatever you're like kind of down for, whatever's like organically relevant. I think maybe we could do like a thing with FJs as the fees down.
Yeah,
Like it depends, whatever. Like this is genuinely like the conversation is more so like a forum where we have like this trio where we go round and round until everything's mined, and then we just kind of finish off, wrap it up, and just have a little decompression beyond that point. So I think we could probably wrap it up here, to be honest.
perfect.
Right then. I mean, thanks for coming. Thanks
Thank
for your
you.
time. This was awesome. Outa as well. Yeah, this was a great space. We'll see when it comes up again. Yeah, I'm gonna head into Discord now because it's like the time of the day where I usually do the daily thing for my subscribers.
Oh, I got to
So if
check
you'd
out
like
your
to join it,
Discord. Can you
it's up there.
can you tell us how to get there?
Yeah, it's right up at the top. It's right up at the
Sounds
top.
great.
I can give you the content creator role as well, which would
That'd
be
be
kind of
great.
funny.
Yeah, I'd love to.
So yeah, excellent. All right, so the link is up at the top, discord.gg/noetic. Go join that. There's a bit of a chaos in general chat right now because a bunch of people decided, hey, let's have a cat fight, which I think is kind of funny because I'm like, hey, this is hilarious. We like discussing technological things, and like there's just a fight going on there in the background. We go like, oh, that's a nice little source of dopamine. I was like, what the fuck? But yeah, so yeah, join the server. I'll end the space here right now.
Thanks a lot, Adrian.
Thank you all for coming.